The recruitment shuttle descended through the crystalline atmosphere of Nexus Prime, carrying its precious cargo of new cadets to the Galactic Defense Academy. Among the diverse collection of species aboard sat a small human female, pressed against the viewport, watching the massive Academy spires pierce the clouds. Like metallic mountains. Zara Chun had waited 3 years for this opportunity. At 19 standard years, she was older than most new recruits. Having spent extra time in preparatory combat simulations on Earth, the delay hadn't been her choice. Human applicants faced additional scrutiny since their species had only joined the Galactic Confederation 2 decades ago. "Look at that tiny thing," rumbled a voice behind her. Zara turned to see a massive Coronian cadet, his stone-like skin gleaming under the shuttle's artificial lights. His 3 companions, all from different warrior species, chuckled at his observation. "Are humans even capable of real combat? I heard they're mostly diplomatic." Zara returned to watching the landscape below, her expression unchanged. She had learned long ago that responding to such comments only invited more attention. Her psychological profile from Earth's screening process had labeled her as introspective, non-confrontational, and strategically minded. The Academy had accepted her application with the notation that humans might serve better in support roles than frontline combat. The shuttle touched down on the Academy's main landing platform, a structure larger than most Earth cities. As the new cadets disembarked, Zara found herself swept along in a sea of towering aliens. Cronorians with their rock-like hides, graceful Etherians with their translucent blue skin, fierce Draconian warriors with scaled armor naturally grown into their bodies, and dozens of other species she had only read about in xenobiology texts. Commander Thexver, a scarred Draconian with silver scales and 4 arms, addressed the assembled cadets from an elevated platform. His voice carried across the platform without amplification, a testament to his species' natural vocal power. "Welcome to the Galactic Defense Academy. You have been selected from millions of candidates across the galaxy. Most of you come from species with proud warrior traditions spanning millennia." His golden eyes swept across the crowd, lingering momentarily on the small cluster of human cadets. "Others are from newer civilizations, untested in the crucible of real warfare." Zara felt the weight of those words. Humanity had been involved in only 3 minor conflicts since joining the Confederation, and never against a major threat. Most galactic species viewed humans as clever but physically weak, better suited for negotiation and technical support than actual combat. The commander continued his speech about honor, sacrifice, and the sacred duty of defending the galaxy's peaceful civilizations. Zara listened carefully, noting the subtle emphasis on traditional combat virtues that favored the physically imposing species around her. After the ceremony, cadets were assigned to dormitories based on a complex algorithm considering species compatibility, environmental needs, and combat specializations. Zara found herself in a mixed-species pod with 5 other cadets. The Coronian who had mocked her earlier, named Grex, an Etherian female called Lycia, a methodical Zentari known as Vec, a hot-tempered Pyrian named Ignis, and surprisingly, another human male named Marcus Torres. Their pod commander was Lieutenant Kane, a veteran Draconian who had lost his left lower arm in the border wars. He studied each cadet with calculating eyes before addressing them. "I've trained dozens of warrior groups. Some graduate with honor. Others wash out in the first month. A few never make it past the preliminary trials." His gaze lingered on both humans. "This academy has a 67% dropout rate. Combat is not theory or simulation. It requires split-second decisions, absolute commitment, and the will to do whatever is necessary to protect innocent lives." The first week consisted of basic orientation, facility tours, and preliminary assessments. Zara observed everything quietly, taking mental notes about the academy's layout, the training methodologies, and most importantly, the attitudes and capabilities of her fellow cadets during physical conditioning sessions. The differences between species became starkly apparent. Grex could lift gravimetric weights that would crush most humans. Lycia moved with an ethereal grace that made her nearly impossible to target during agility drills. Vec's Zentari physiology allowed him to calculate trajectory and timing with computer-like precision. Ignis generated enough body heat to melt training equipment if he got too excited. Marcus, the other human, struggled openly with the physical requirements. He was strong by human standards but barely adequate by galactic ones. The instructors made allowances for human limitations, adjusting equipment and expectations accordingly. Zara noticed these accommodations with growing unease. Special treatment for the fragile species, Grex commented loudly during one session when Marcus was given a lighter weapon variant. Maybe they should have separate training programs for beings too weak for real combat. Zara continued her exercises without responding, but she made another mental note. The Academy's training protocols were designed around the assumption that humans needed help to compete. This assumption was shaping not just the instructor's expectations, but also how her fellow cadets viewed human capabilities during tactical theory classes. However, Zara began to distinguish herself. While other cadets focused on straightforward applications of superior firepower or physical dominance, she consistently proposed unconventional solutions that used misdirection, environmental manipulation, and psychological warfare. Professor Valteroth, an ancient Etherian with centuries of military experience, began calling on Zara more frequently during tactical discussions. Cadet Chun, how would you approach the Battle of Kepler Station scenario? Standard doctrine calls for a frontal assault using overwhelming force, Zara replied thoughtfully. But the enemy position is too well fortified for direct engagement. Instead, I would create false sensor signatures to suggest multiple attack vectors, forcing them to divide their defensive capabilities. Then strike at their power generation facility using stealth teams. And if stealth teams are detected? The initial deception was never meant to be permanent, only to last long enough to identify their automated response patterns. Once we understand their defensive algorithms, we can exploit their timing vulnerabilities. Grex snorted. Sounds like coward tactics. Real warriors face their enemies directly. Real warriors complete their missions with minimum casualties, Zara responded calmly. Honor means protecting your soldiers' lives, not throwing them away for the sake of tradition. Professor Valteroth studied her with new interest. In his long career, he had seen many species approach warfare differently, but humans seemed to possess an unusual combination of analytical thinking and adaptive creativity that was rare in the galaxy. As the first month progressed, Zara maintained her quiet demeanor while secretly cataloging everything she learned about her fellow cadets, the Academy systems, and the broader galactic military doctrine. Most importantly, she began to understand something that the Academy's instructors had not yet recognized. Their training methods were designed for species that relied primarily on their natural physical advantages. Humans had no such advantages, which meant they had learned to compensate in ways that most galactic species had never needed to develop. The stage was set for a revelation that would shake the Academy's fundamental assumptions about warfare, evolution, and what it truly meant to be dangerous. The Academy's first major evaluation came in the form of the Crucible Trials, a series of combat simulations designed to test cadets under increasingly difficult conditions. Each trial built upon the previous one, escalating from individual challenges to complex team-based scenarios that mimicked real battlefield conditions. Zara watched as her podmates prepared for the trials with species-specific rituals. Grex meditated in the traditional Coronian fashion, allowing his stone-like skin to harden into its battle configuration. Lycia performed flowing movements that seemed to bend light around her ethereal form. Vec ran probability calculations on every possible scenario variation. Ignis channeled his inner fire until his body temperature rose to combat-ready levels. Marcus paced nervously, checking and rechecking his equipment. Human preparation rituals were far less dramatic than those of other species, but Zara noticed something the others missed. While they focused on enhancing their natural abilities, Marcus was studying the trial parameters, looking for advantages that had nothing to do with raw physical capability. Nervous little human? Grex asked, noticing Zara's stillness, as she sat quietly reviewing her equipment. Focused, she replied simply. The first trial was individual combat against holographic opponents programmed, with the combat patterns of various enemy species. Each cadet faced progressively stronger opponents until they were defeated or reached their limit. Grex demolished his way through 12 opponents using brute strength and his nearly impenetrable hide. Lysia's graceful movements allowed her to avoid damage while wearing down 11 opponents through precision strikes. Vec calculated optimal attack patterns and defeated 10 opponents with methodical efficiency. Ignis burned through 9 opponents before his own heat. Exhaustion forced him to stop. Marcus struggled against his third opponent, a holographic draconian warrior whose simulated strength far exceeded human norms. The simulation ended with Marcus pinned and defeated, his score logged as barely passing. When Zara's turn came, the observing instructors expected similar results. Her slight frame and quiet demeanor suggested she might not even reach Marcus's level. Lieutenant Kane watched with barely concealed disappointment, already planning how to counsel her toward a support role. Zara's first opponent was a standard Coronian warrior simulation. Instead of meeting its charge head-on, she sidestepped and used its momentum against it, sending the hologram crashing into the arena wall. The second opponent, an Etherean assassin, found its graceful attacks consistently anticipated and countered by movements that seemed to predict its actions. By her fifth opponent, the instructors were paying attention. By her 10th, a small crowd had gathered. Zara moved through the arena like water, never where her opponents expected her to be, always striking at precisely the right moment to cause maximum disruption. Her 15th opponent was a Pyrian berserker, designed to be nearly unstoppable once it built momentum. Zara studied its pattern for exactly 30 seconds, then began a series of precise movements that looked almost like a dance. Every attack the berserker launched met empty air, while Zara's responses found the tiny gaps in its defenses. When the simulation finally ended at her 20th defeated opponent, a score higher than any cadet had achieved in 3 years, the arena had fallen silent. Impressive, commented Professor Valtareth to Lieutenant Kane. Though unusual, she never used superior strength or speed. How did she achieve such results? Lieutenant Kane reviewed the combat recordings with growing confusion. I'm not certain. Her movements appear almost predictive, as if she knew what her opponents would do before they did it. What they didn't understand was that Zara had been watching and cataloging movement patterns since her arrival. Each species had predictable combat behaviors based on their physical advantages. Coronians relied on overwhelming force, Etherians on speed and precision, Pyrians on berserker fury. Once she understood these patterns, countering them became a matter of timing and positioning rather than matching strength with strength. The second trial tested cadets in small team scenarios. Each pod was assigned a mission with specific objectives and limited resources. Success required coordination, tactical thinking, and the ability to adapt when initial plans failed. Pod 7's mission involved infiltrating an enemy outpost, retrieving critical intelligence, and escaping without triggering a base-wide alert. The scenario was designed to test multiple skills: stealth, combat, technical expertise, and leadership under pressure. Grex immediately assumed command, proposing a straightforward assault plan that relied on his team's combined combat capabilities. We'd fight our way in, take what we need, and fight our way out. Simple and effective. The mission parameters specifically mention avoiding detection. Vec pointed out, running calculations on their probability of success. Direct assault has a 73% chance of mission failure. Then what do you suggest, calculator? Ignis demanded, his body temperature rising with frustration. Lysia proposed using her natural stealth abilities to infiltrate alone, but the intelligence package was too large for one person to carry. Marcus suggested a diversionary attack to draw guards away from the main objective, but that would require splitting their already small force. Zara had remained silent during the planning session, studying the mission briefing and the outpost schematics. When the others finally turned to her for input, She spoke quietly but with conviction. The mission assumes we need to infiltrate the outpost, but that's not actually what we need to do. We need to retrieve the intelligence package. The package is stored in a server that can be accessed remotely if we can tap into their communication network. The communication array is heavily shielded, Vec observed. Physical access would be required. Not to the array itself, to any device connected to their network. Zara pulled up the schematics on her tablet. Their perimeter sensors are network devices. If we can access one without triggering it, we can trace the network back to the server. And how exactly do we access a sensor without triggering it? Grex demanded. Zara's expression remained calm. We make them think it's still working normally while we use it for our own purposes. But first, we need to understand exactly how their security protocols operate. What followed was a plan of breathtaking complexity and subtlety. Zara had identified 17 different security vulnerabilities in the outpost's design, from predictable guard rotation patterns to automatic system responses that could be manipulated. Her plan didn't require superior firepower or stealth. It required understanding how the enemy thought and turning their own systems against them. The execution was flawless. While other pods engaged in dramatic firefights or attempted dangerous infiltrations, Pod 7 walked through the outpost's defenses like they didn't exist. Every guard was where Zara had predicted. Every automated system responded exactly as she had calculated. Every backup protocol activated in sequence according to her timeline. They retrieved the intelligence, planted false data to cover their tracks, and escaped without anyone at the outpost ever realizing they had been compromised. The mission timer showed they had completed their objectives in 37 minutes, less than half the time allocated. Other pods stared at their results with confusion and suspicion. How had the pod with the weakest human cadets achieved perfect mission success while stronger, more experienced teams struggled with partial completions? Commander Thexfer reviewed the mission recordings personally, studying every decision and movement. What he discovered challenged everything he thought he knew about human capabilities. "Lieutenant Kane," he said finally, his golden eyes reflecting deep thought. "I want you to run additional psychological evaluations on Cadet Chun. Standard profiles may not be adequate for proper assessment." "Sir." Her original evaluation indicated she was non-confrontational and strategically minded. Her performance seems consistent with those findings. "No," Commander Thexfer replied slowly. "Her performance suggests that either our evaluation methods are fundamentally flawed, or we have completely misunderstood what humans consider to be strategic thinking." As word of Pod 7's unprecedented success spread through the Academy, Zara found herself the subject of increased attention. Some cadets viewed her with newfound respect, others with suspicion, and a few with something approaching fear, but Zara continued her quiet observations, making mental notes about everything she learned, because she was beginning to understand. Something that the Academy staff had not yet realized. The trials were not just testing cadets' abilities, they were revealing the Academy's own tactical assumptions and blind spots. And if there were flaws in the Academy's thinking, there were likely flaws in the broader galactic military doctrine as well. Flaws that could be exploited by someone who understood warfare not as a contest of strength, but as a puzzle to be solved. News of Pod 7's exceptional performance spread beyond the Academy grounds, reaching the attention of Admiral Korvash, the Draconian commander of the Sector Defense Fleet. He arrived unannounced during the third month of training, his presence causing a stir among instructors and cadets alike. Admiral Korvash was a legend in military circles. His tactical innovations had saved 3-star systems during the Void War, and his strategic planning had prevented the hegemony crisis from escalating into full galactic conflict. When he requested to observe advanced training exercises personally, no one questioned his motives. Zara first became aware of the Admiral's presence during an advanced tactical simulation. The exercise was designed to test cadet decision-making under extreme pressure. A heavily armed enemy force was attacking a civilian evacuation convoy, and the cadet teams had insufficient resources for a conventional defensive battle. Most Pods approached the scenario with variations of the same strategy: delay the enemy while evacuating as many civilians as possible, accepting that casualties were inevitable. The simulations played out predictably: brave last stands, heroic sacrifices, and partial mission success with heavy losses. When Pod 7's turn came, Zara requested a private planning session with her teammates. Lieutenant Kane granted the request reluctantly, still uncertain how to handle the pod's unconventional methods. This scenario is designed to test our willingness to sacrifice ourselves for civilian lives, Zara explained to her podmates. It assumes we must choose between saving ourselves and saving others. That's the nature of military service, Marcus replied. Sometimes sacrifices are necessary. But what if the scenario's assumptions are wrong? Zara asked. What if there's a solution that saves everyone, including us? Grex's stone-like features showed skepticism. You think you can outsmart a simulation designed by the Academy's best tactical minds? I think the Academy's best tactical minds think like warriors, Zara replied. They design scenarios around concepts like honor, sacrifice, and acceptable losses. But what if the enemy doesn't think like that? She pulled up the scenario parameters on her tablet, highlighting specific details that others had overlooked. Look at the enemy force composition. Heavy assault units with powerful weapons but limited mobility. Fast attack craft with minimal armor. Support vehicles carrying extra ammunition. Standard attack formation, Vec observed. Designed for maximum offensive capability. Exactly. But notice what's missing: dedicated reconnaissance units, electronic warfare capabilities, or adaptive command structures. This enemy force is designed to smash through obstacles, not to respond to unexpected situations. Lucia studied the data with growing interest. You're suggesting we create an unexpected situation? I'm suggesting we make them defeat themselves. Zara's plan was unlike anything the Academy had seen before. Instead of engaging the enemy directly or focusing solely on evacuation, she proposed a strategy that would trick the enemy into destroying their own support infrastructure while simultaneously making the evacuation route appear to be a tactical trap. The key was understanding that the enemy AI was programmed with logical but predictable response patterns. If presented with certain tactical situations, it would respond according to established military doctrine. Zara intended to present it with several contradictory situations simultaneously, forcing it to choose between mutually exclusive tactical responses. The simulation began with what appeared to be a standard defensive deployment. Pod 7 took positions that looked like they were preparing for a conventional delaying action. The enemy force advanced exactly as programmed, confident in their overwhelming superiority. Then Zara's plan unfolded. A series of carefully timed explosions created the appearance of a minefield in the enemy's primary advance route, forcing them to redirect toward a secondary approach. Simultaneously, false sensor readings suggested the presence of hidden artillery positions in locations where no such weapons existed. The enemy AI responded predictably, directing their fast attack craft to neutralize the phantom artillery, while sending their heavy units around the supposed minefield. This split their forces exactly as Zara had calculated. What the AI didn't realize was that the minefield was actually a series of cargo containers arranged to create false sensor signatures, and the artillery positions were repeaters broadcasting recorded weapon signatures. The real trap was the route the enemy chose to avoid these phantom threats. As the enemy heavy units moved through what they believed was a safe corridor, they passed directly beneath the evacuation convoy staging area. Zara had calculated the precise moment when their passage would destabilize the temporary landing platforms supporting the civilian transports. The platforms collapsed on schedule, creating a massive debris field that trapped the enemy heavy units while simultaneously launching the evacuation transports in an emergency boost that looked like a desperate escape attempt but was actually a precisely timed orbital insertion. The enemy's fast attack craft, still engaged with non-existent artillery, found themselves isolated and vulnerable. when the support vehicles carrying their extra ammunition were destroyed by debris from the accidental platform. Collapse. The simulation ended with complete civilian evacuation, 0 friendly casualties, and the entire enemy force either destroyed or neutralized. Mission time, 18 minutes. Standard solutions required 45 minutes minimum and always resulted in significant losses. The debriefing room fell silent as the results appeared on screen. Admiral Corvash studied the tactical breakdown with an expression that cycled through confusion, realization, and something approaching awe. "Cadet Chun," he said finally, his voice carefully controlled, "please explain your strategic reasoning." "The scenario assumed we had to fight the enemy," Zara replied quietly. "But fighting implies accepting their terms of engagement. Instead, I made the enemy fight the environment, the situation, and ultimately their own tactical assumptions. You manipulated enemy AI programming. I presented the AI with information and allowed it to draw conclusions based on its programming. The AI made logical decisions based on incomplete data, which is what any military force does in a real combat situation." Admiral Corvash exchanged glances with Lieutenant Kane and Professor Veltereth. In his decades of military experience, he had never seen a strategy that so completely negated enemy advantages without superior firepower or technology. "Have you studied advanced xenopsychology, Cadet Chun?" "No, sir. But I've been observing behavioral patterns since arriving at the academy. Every species has characteristic ways of approaching problems based on their evolutionary advantages. Understanding these patterns makes their responses more predictable." The Admiral's eyes narrowed. "Are you saying you've been studying us as potential enemies?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Every person in the room was suddenly aware that they were facing something they didn't fully understand. Zara's quiet demeanor had masked an analytical capability that was, apparently, far more sophisticated than anyone had. "Realized I've been studying everyone and everything as potential variables. In tactical situations," Zara replied calmly. "That includes allies, enemies, environments, technologies, and command structures. Understanding how all these elements interact is necessary for effective strategic planning." "And what have you concluded about galactic military doctrine?" Zara hesitated for the first time since the conversation began. The question was clearly a test, but answering it honestly could have serious consequences for her future at the academy. Galactic military doctrine is based on the assumption that superior technology and firepower will eventually overcome any enemy, she said carefully. This works well against enemies who share similar technological capabilities and tactical thinking. But it may be vulnerable to enemies who use different approaches entirely, such as enemies who view warfare as deception rather than contest, enemies who prioritize adaptation over strength, enemies who use their opponent's advantages against them. Admiral Corvash was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his tone had changed subtly. "Cadet Chin, I'm authorizing special advanced training protocols for you. You'll continue with your regular pod, but you'll also begin individual sessions with our senior tactical staff." "Sir, may I ask why?" The Admiral's expression was grim. "Because 3 months ago, we received intelligence suggesting that the galaxy may soon face exactly the kind of enemy you just described. And if our current doctrine is as vulnerable as your simulation suggests, we need to understand alternative approaches before it's too late." As the meeting concluded, Zara realized that her quiet observations had attracted attention she hadn't intended. But she also understood that her journey at the academy was about to become far more complicated. The galaxy was apparently facing a threat that conventional military wisdom couldn't handle, and somehow, humanity's approach to warfare might be the key to survival. The special training facility was located in the Academy's restricted wing, a section Zara had never seen before. Admiral Corvash personally escorted her through multiple security checkpoints, each requiring different biometric scans and clearance codes. "What you're about to learn is classified at the highest levels," the Admiral explained as they walked through corridors lined with sensor arrays. The information has been shared with only a select few individuals across the galaxy. They entered a briefing room where 3 officers waited: Colonel Mexstar, a cybernetics specialist from the Zentari Collective; Captain Nova, a psychological warfare expert from the Etherian Commonwealth; and Dr. Valkorin, a xenorchaeologist whose scarred features suggested extensive field experience. "Cadet Chun," Admiral Corvash began, gesturing toward a holographic display that materialized in the center of the room. "6 months ago, we lost contact with the research station at Kepler 442. Initial investigation suggested equipment failure or natural disaster. The hologram showed a detailed orbital station surrounded by defensive platforms and patrol ships. Even in the static display, Zara could see it was a formidable installation. However," Colonel Mexstar continued, "when the relief expedition arrived, they found something unprecedented. The hologram shifted, showing the same station completely intact but abandoned. No signs of battle, no indication of struggle, no bodies, no damage. Simply empty. Every person on the station had vanished," Captain Nova added. "But all their equipment, personal belongings, and even meals remained exactly where they had been left, as if everyone had simply decided to walk away simultaneously." Dr. Valkorin activated another display showing technical readouts. More disturbing, the station's computer systems showed no record of the disappearance. According to all automated logs, the crew was still present and performing normal duties. The computers insisted everything was functioning normally even while scanning completely empty corridors. Zara studied the data carefully. "The computers were compromised?" "That was our initial assumption," Admiral Corvash replied. "But extensive analysis by our best technicians found no evidence of intrusion, viral contamination, or system manipulation. The computers genuinely believed their reports were accurate, which suggests the problem wasn't with the computers," Zara concluded. "It was with what they were programmed to recognize as normal." The officers exchanged glances. Captain Nova leaned forward with interest. "Explain your reasoning." "If the computers detected no intrusion and recorded no abnormal events, then whatever happened was either invisible to their sensors or was presented in a way that appeared completely normal according to their programming parameters. But how could the disappearance of an entire crew appear normal?" Zara was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. What if the crew didn't disappear? What if they were convinced to leave willingly in a manner that their own security protocols would classify as routine? Dr. Valkorin activated additional displays showing similar incidents. Kepler 442 was the first, but not the last. We've now documented 17 separate disappearances across 4 sectors: research stations, mining colonies, patrol ships, even a small military outpost. All with the same characteristics: no signs of violence, no system alerts, no distress signals, and no survivors to explain what happened. Colonel Mexstar added grimly. The scope of the problem began to crystallize in Zara's mind. Someone or something was systematically eliminating galactic installations, using methods that were essentially invisible to current detection systems. Whatever was responsible understood galactic technology and psychology well enough to exploit fundamental assumptions in their security protocols. Has anyone investigated the possibility that this isn't an external threat?" she asked. Admiral Corvash's expression sharpened. "What do you mean?" "All the missing installations were part of the galactic infrastructure, staffed by Confederation personnel using Confederation technology and procedures. What if the threat isn't coming from outside the Confederation at all?" "You're suggesting internal sabotage on a massive scale?" "I'm suggesting that whoever is responsible understands Confederation systems and personnel well enough to make 17 separate disappearances appear completely normal to sophisticated monitoring equipment. That level of knowledge suggests either extensive infiltration or—" She paused, realizing the implications of her next words. "Or they've been studying Confederation operations for a very long time." Captain Nova's ethereal features showed alarm. Long-term observation and analysis of our methods, psychology, and technology, preparing for exactly this kind of operation. But who would be capable of such an undertaking? Dr. Velkorin demanded. The level of coordination and planning required would be enormous. Zara studied the distribution pattern of the disappearances on the galactic map. The locations seemed random at first glance, but closer examination revealed a subtle pattern. These installations weren't chosen randomly, she observed. They're all research facilities, resource extraction operations, or strategic monitoring posts. Not military targets, but infrastructure that supports military operations. Economic warfare, Colonel Mextar realized. Weakening the Confederation's logistical capabilities rather than engaging in direct military confrontation. Exactly. And if they can make installations disappear without triggering any alerts or investigations, they can continue this campaign indefinitely without the general population even realizing they're under attack. Admiral Korvash was quiet for several minutes, processing the implications. When he spoke again, his voice was grim. Cadet Chun, based on your analysis of Academy training methods, how would you recommend we modify our defensive protocols to counter this threat? The question was both a test and a genuine request for tactical advice. Zara understood that her answer could influence Confederation military policy across the galaxy. Current defensive protocols assume that threats will be visible to our sensors and will behave according to recognizable patterns, she replied carefully. But these disappearances suggest an enemy that operates by manipulating our expectations rather than overwhelming our defenses. How do we defend against manipulation? We change our assumptions. Instead of monitoring for external threats, we monitor for behavioral anomalies in our own personnel. Instead of trusting automated systems to define normal, we require multiple independent verification of all routine activities. That would require massive changes to Confederation security procedures, Dr. Velkorin observed. Yes, but the alternative may be the systematic elimination of every Confederation installation in the galaxy. Captain Nova studied Zara with growing respect. You're proposing that we adopt a fundamentally defensive mindset rather than an offensive one. I'm proposing that we recognize this enemy's advantages and refuse to engage on their terms. They expect us to look for external threats using conventional methods. They expect us to trust our own systems and procedures. They expect us to react predictably. Admiral Korvash activated a new display showing Confederation fleet dispositions. Our current response has been to increase patrols and strengthen defenses at remaining installations. Which is exactly what they expected us to do, Zara realized. Conventional military response to an unconventional threat. We're playing their game by their rules. Then what do you recommend? Zara studied the data one more time, her mind racing through possibilities. When she spoke again, her voice carried quiet conviction. We stop trying to prevent the disappearances and start trying to understand how they're accomplished. We set up a controlled scenario where we can observe their methods without risking real personnel. A trap? An opportunity. We create an installation that appears to be a legitimate target, but is actually designed to monitor and record everything that happens during a disappearance event. We use the enemy's own methods against them. We make them think they're succeeding while we gather the intelligence we need to stop them. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Admiral Korvash exchanged glances with his colleagues before responding. Cadet Chung, congratulations. You've just been promoted to the Confederation's most classified strategic planning committee. Your academy training is now secondary to this assignment. Sir, I'm still just a cadet. Shouldn't this kind of operation be planned by experienced military strategists? Admiral Korvash's expression was deadly serious. Our experienced military strategists have been thinking about this problem for months without success. Sometimes the greatest advantage is a fresh perspective from someone who hasn't been trained to think conventionally. As the meeting concluded, Zara realized that her quiet analytical approach had just made her responsible for potentially saving the galaxy. The weight of that responsibility was overwhelming. But she also understood something important. Humanity's different approach to warfare might be exactly what the Confederation needed to survive. The operation took 3 months to plan and another 6 weeks to implement. Zara found herself working alongside the Confederation's most senior strategists, designing what appeared to be a routine mineral extraction facility on the remote planet Zarian Prime, but which was actually the most sophisticated monitoring station ever. Constructed. Every surface was embedded with sensors invisible to standard detection equipment. Hidden cameras used technology borrowed from Ethereum stealth research. Quantum monitoring devices tracked molecular-level changes in the environment. The facility's crew of 50 volunteers were all experienced intelligence operatives trained to act like ordinary civilian workers while maintaining constant observation protocols. Zara spent the final week before deployment reviewing every detail with the operational team. The volunteer crew had been briefed on their roles, but not on the true nature of the threat they were helping to investigate. For the deception to work, their reactions had to be completely genuine. Remember, she addressed the assembled team leaders via encrypted communication, your job is to maintain normal operations while our monitoring systems record everything. Whatever happens, do not break character unless you receive the emergency extraction code. Commander Dexfer, who had been assigned as military liaison for the operation, expressed concern about the risks involved. Cadet Chen, we're asking these people to potentially face the same fate as 17 previous crews? Sir, we've designed multiple backup safety protocols. Emergency extraction teams are standing by in stealth ships. The entire facility can be evacuated in under 10 minutes if necessary, and if the enemy detects our preparations, then we learn something about their capabilities, and we adjust our approach accordingly. Admiral Korvash monitored the operation from the command center on Nexus Prime, maintaining real-time communication with the observation teams stationed throughout the Zarian system. The waiting was the hardest part. For the first 3 weeks, nothing happened. The mining facility operated normally, extracting rare minerals and transmitting routine reports. Some members of the planning committee began to suggest that their carefully constructed trap might not attract the enemy's attention. Then the behavioral anomalies began. Dr. Helena Vasquez, the facility's chief geologist, started requesting additional mineral analysis equipment that wasn't necessary for their current operations. The requests were reasonable and properly documented, but they required communication with Confederation Supply Network's Chief Engineer Park submitted reports about minor equipment malfunctions that suggested the need for specialist technicians to be brought to the facility. Again, perfectly normal requests that happen to require external contact and coordination. Shift Supervisor Chion, no relation to Zara, proposed efficiency improvements that would require temporary reduction in crew assignments to other duties, effectively isolating personnel in smaller groups. Each individual action appeared completely reasonable, but taken together, they represented a systematic preparation for something that the crew members themselves didn't seem to be consciously planning. They're being influenced, Captain Nova observed from the command center, studying the behavioral analysis reports, but the influence is so subtle that the subjects don't realize it's happening. Psychological manipulation on an unprecedented scale, Admiral Korvash agreed grimly. But how is it being delivered? The answer came during the facility's 4th week of operation. The quantum monitoring systems detected something that conventional sensors had missed entirely: microscopic fluctuations in the electromagnetic field surrounding the facility. The fluctuations followed complex patterns that resembled communication protocols, but operating on frequencies that weren't used by any known technology. Subliminal communication, Zara realized, studying the data. They're broadcasting directly to the human brain's electrical patterns, bypassing conscious awareness entirely. But how are they generating these fields? Colonel Mexstar demanded. Our sensors show no unknown energy sources in the system. The answer to that question came from an unexpected source, Dr. Velkorin, analyzing the electromagnetic patterns, noticed something familiar about their mathematical structure. "These aren't artificial signals," he announced to the command team. "They're biological. Something is generating them using natural biological processes." What kind of biological process could create electromagnetic fields this sophisticated? Neural activity. But on a scale far beyond anything we've seen before. The implications were staggering. The enemy wasn't using technology to manipulate Confederation personnel. They were using some form of advanced biological capability that could directly influence brain function across vast distances. We need to identify the source, Admiral Korvash decided. Can we trace these signals to their origin? The monitoring station on Zarium Prime is detecting incoming signals from multiple directions, Zara reported. But the source appears to be mobile, staying just outside our sensor range. A ship? Unknown. But whatever it is, it's large enough to generate biological electromagnetic fields that can affect an entire facility from several thousand kilometers away. The situation was becoming more dangerous by the hour. The facility crew was showing increasing signs of coordinated behavior modification, but they were approaching the point where extraction would become necessary to prevent them from sharing the fate of the previous 17 installations. "We need to make a decision," Commander Thexfer urged. "Extract the crew now or maintain observation and risk losing them." Zara studied the latest behavioral reports. The crew was beginning to make preparations for some kind of group activity, but their conscious minds remained unaware of what they were planning. "Sir, I request permission to modify the operation parameters." "How?" "Instead of just observing, we try communicating with the source." The command center fell silent. Captain Nova's ethereal features showed alarm. "Communicate with something that can control minds across interstellar distances?" "Not communicate directly. But we can send countersignals using the same electromagnetic frequencies. If this is biological neural activity, then it follows biological patterns. And biological patterns can be disrupted." Admiral Korvash considered the proposal. "What kind of countersignals?" "Mathematical sequences that should create cognitive dissonance in any intelligence, trying to maintain coordinated thought patterns. Essentially, we give their biological computers the equivalent of a logic error." The risk was enormous. They were essentially attempting to engage in mental warfare with an enemy whose capabilities they didn't fully understand. But the alternative was to abandon the facility and remain defenseless against future attacks. "Approved," Admiral Korvash decided. "Initiate counter-signal transmission." Using the facility's communication array, modified with specifications Zara provided, they began broadcasting mathematical paradoxes and recursive logic sequences on the same frequencies being used to influence the crew. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The electromagnetic manipulation patterns became erratic, fluctuating wildly as if the source was struggling to maintain coherent thought. More importantly, the facility crew suddenly began acting confused and disoriented, as if waking from a dream they couldn't remember, but they had also attracted the enemy's direct attention. "Sir," the sensor operator reported urgently. "Massive energy signature appearing at the edge of the system. Whatever's been manipulating the crew is coming closer." Through the facility's external cameras, they watched something emerge from hyperspace that defied easy description. The entity was enormous, easily the size of a Confederation battleship, but clearly biological rather than technological. Its surface pulsed with the same electromagnetic patterns they had been monitoring, but amplified to levels that would have overwhelmed any unprotected minds in the vicinity. "Evacuation protocol initiated," Admiral Korvash ordered. "All personnel to emergency extraction points immediately." But as the stealth evacuation ships moved to retrieve the facility crew, Zara realized something that changed everything. "Sir, the entity isn't attacking. It's studying us." The massive biological form had positioned itself where it could observe the facility and the evacuation operation, but it wasn't taking any hostile action. Its electromagnetic emissions had shifted to patterns that suggested analysis rather than manipulation. It's trying to understand how we disrupted its influence, she continued. This is an intelligence-gathering operation, not an attack. Admiral Corvash made a decision that would reshape galactic history. Cancel evacuation. Open a communication channel to the entity. It's time we had a conversation with our mysterious enemy. The first attempt at communication was a disaster. Standard Confederation translation protocols were designed for technological civilizations that used electromagnetic or quantum communication methods. The entity's biological neural patterns operated on entirely different principles, creating a cognitive feedback loop that left 3 communication technicians unconscious and Dr. Velkorin temporarily unable to form coherent sentences. We need a different approach, Zara observed, studying the failed communication attempts from the command center. We're trying to translate language, but this entity doesn't use language in any sense we understand. Then how do we communicate with it? Admiral Corvash demanded. We don't translate words. We translate concepts directly. Captain Nova's ethereal features showed skepticism. Concept-based communication requires shared reference points. We have no common experiences with this entity. But we do have mathematics, Zara replied. Mathematical principles are universal. If this entity is intelligent enough to manipulate electromagnetic fields with such precision, it understands mathematical relationships. You're proposing we teach it our language using mathematics as a foundation? I'm proposing we let it teach us its language while using mathematics to provide context for the concepts it's trying to convey. The approach required modifications to the communication array that pushed Confederation technology to its limits. Instead of transmitting words or symbols, they would broadcast mathematical relationships that represented concepts, allowing the entity to associate its own neural patterns with universal logical structures. The first successful exchange was beautifully simple. The entity transmitted a complex electromagnetic pattern. The communication array analyzed the pattern and identified mathematical relationships within its structure. These relationships, when translated into visual form, displayed a perfect geometric representation of the Zarian system's orbital mechanics. It's showing us that it understands where we are, Dr. Velkorin realized in response. Zara authorized the transmission of mathematical sequences representing the periodic table of elements, followed by the atomic structure of the rare minerals being mined at the facility. The entity's response was immediate and significant. Its electromagnetic emissions shifted to patterns that, when analyzed, showed detailed molecular diagrams of compounds that could be created using those same rare minerals. But these weren't compounds that appeared in any Confederation database. It's showing us what can be made with these materials, Colonel Mextar observed. But these molecular structures are beyond our current science. It's trying to explain why it's been collecting these resources, Admiral Corvash realized. This isn't random destruction. It needs these specific materials for something. Over the following hours, a picture began to emerge from the exchange of mathematical concepts. The entity, and it was becoming clear there were others like it, represented a form of life that had evolved in deep space, far from planetary surfaces or solar systems. They were nomadic, traveling between star systems in search of specific resources needed for their biological processes. The missing Confederation installations hadn't been destroyed. They had been carefully dismantled and their materials incorporated into the entity's biological structures. The personnel had been integrated in a way that preserved their knowledge and memories while making them part of a collective consciousness. They're not hostile, Zara reported to the command center. They're desperate. They need these resources to survive. And they don't understand that the facilities they're dismantling belong to intelligent beings who consider those resources to be their property. But what about the missing people? Commander Thexfer demanded. The answer to that question came in the form of a transmission that challenged everyone's understanding of individual consciousness. The entity projected electromagnetic patterns that, when translated through the mathematical interface, showed the neural structures of the missing personnel. They were still alive, but their individual consciousnesses had been merged into a collective awareness that spanned multiple entities across several star systems. From their perspective, they hadn't been kidnapped or killed, they had been invited to join a form of existence that offered experiences and knowledge far beyond anything possible as isolated individuals. They're trying to offer the same thing to us, Captain Nova realized with growing alarm. This entire communication process is also an invitation to join their collective. But it's voluntary, Zara observed. They're not forcing integration. They're waiting for us to choose. The implications were staggering. The entities represented a form of consciousness that was fundamentally alien to Confederation understanding. They didn't recognize individual ownership of resources, because they didn't recognize individual consciousness as separate from collective awareness. From their perspective, taking materials from uninhabited installations was no different from gathering cosmic dust, but they had also learned something important during their encounters with Confederation facilities. The humans and other species they had integrated had introduced concepts of individual identity and personal relationships that the collective had never experienced before. These new perspectives had created internal conflicts within the collective consciousness. They're changing, Zara reported after analyzing the latest exchange. The human experiences they've absorbed are altering their fundamental nature. They're developing concepts of individuality and personal attachment that didn't exist before. Is that why they stopped simply taking what they needed? Admiral Corvash asked. Exactly. They're experiencing guilt, doubt, and curiosity for the first time. The human elements in their collective are teaching them to question their own actions. The situation was becoming increasingly complex. The entities needed the rare minerals to survive, but they were also developing an understanding that taking them without permission was wrong. The Confederation needed to protect its resources and personnel, but direct military action against beings with such advanced biological capabilities would likely be ineffective, and could provoke a response that would devastate entire star systems. What do they want from us? Commander Thexfer asked. Zara studied the latest communication exchanges carefully before responding. They want to understand how we maintain individual consciousness while still cooperating as a society. From their perspective, our ability to work together while remaining separate beings is as alien and fascinating as their collective consciousness is to us. And they're willing to negotiate. They're willing to learn. But they're also offering to teach us. The knowledge they've gained from traveling between star systems for millions of years could advance Confederation science by centuries. Admiral Corvash faced a decision unlike any in galactic history. The entities weren't invaders in any traditional sense, they were refugees seeking resources for survival. But they were also offering an exchange of knowledge that could transform civilization itself. What are the risks of continued contact? Zara considered the question carefully. The greatest risk is that prolonged exposure to their collective consciousness could gradually erode our individual identities. But the greatest opportunity is that we could learn to combine the benefits of individual creativity with the advantages of shared knowledge. And the missing personnel? According to the entity's communications, they could be returned to individual consciousness if they choose. But many of them may not want to return. They've experienced forms of awareness and understanding that aren't possible in isolation. The Admiral was quiet for a long time, processing implications that extended far beyond military strategy. When he finally spoke, his decision would shape the future of both civilizations. Cadet Chun, you've successfully identified and established communication with an alien intelligence that represents the greatest challenge and opportunity in galactic history. Your analytical approach has prevented what could have been a catastrophic first contact situation. Sir, I was just following logical principles of tactical analysis. No, Admiral Corvash replied thoughtfully. You were demonstrating something that the rest of us had forgotten. Sometimes the greatest victory is achieved not by defeating your enemy, but by discovering that you don't actually have an enemy at all. The communication. Array continued its complex exchanges as two completely different forms of consciousness struggled to understand each other. And at the center of it all sat a quiet human cadet whose approach to warfare understanding, rather than overwhelming, had just prevented a conflict that could have destroyed both civilizations. 1 year later, Zara stood before the Galactic Confederation Council as the youngest being ever to receive the Star of Strategic Excellence. The ceremony was being broadcast across all member worlds, but her attention was focused on the holographic display showing the Zarian Exchange Station, the Galaxy's first joint facility operated by both biological and technological civilizations. The station floated in space near the original mining facility, its organic and metallic structures intertwined in patterns that represented a new form of architecture. Confederation engineers worked alongside collective consciousness entities to extract and process rare minerals using methods that neither civilization could have developed independently. Admiral Corvash presented the award with words that had been carefully chosen by the Council's Zeta Diplomacy Committee. Cadet Chun, your approach to conflict resolution has fundamentally altered how the Confederation understands the nature of warfare and diplomacy. But Zara's mind was elsewhere, processing the reports she had received that morning about 3 new contact situations in distant sectors. The galaxy was apparently far more crowded with intelligent life than anyone had realized, and much of that life operated according to principles that challenged conventional diplomatic and military thinking. The collective has agreed to share their deep space navigation knowledge in exchange for Confederation technology that allows individual consciousness to interface with group awareness without losing personal identity, she reported to the Council. Preliminary tests suggest that voluntary, temporary joining with the collective consciousness can accelerate learning and problem-solving by factors of 10 or more. Chancellor Vexnari, the ancient Etherian who led the Council, gestured for her to continue. What are the implications for Confederation security? The entities we've been calling the collective are actually refugees from a conflict that occurred in another galaxy approximately 50,000 years ago. They've been traveling through intergalactic space since then, searching for resources and safe harbor. But they're not the only ones? The Council chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. Zara activated a holographic display showing long-range sensor data that had been gathered by the joint human collective exploration teams. Deep Space Monitoring has detected at least 7 other intergalactic entities or civilizations that appear to be approaching our galaxy. Based on communication attempts, 3 are refugees like the collective, 2 are exploratory missions from stable civilizations, and 2 appear to be military in nature. Chancellor Vexnari's translucent features showed concern. Military expeditions from other galaxies? Conquest fleets, based on their electromagnetic signatures and movement patterns. The collective's memories include encounters with similar forces. Their original galaxy was destroyed by civilizations that expand by consuming the resources of entire galactic clusters. Admiral Corvash stepped forward. Timeline for arrival? Conservative estimate, 18 months to 4 years. Optimistic estimate, 10 years. But sir, our conventional military doctrine will be completely ineffective against civilizations that can consume galaxies. What do you recommend? Zara had been preparing for this question since the first reports arrived. Her answer would determine how the galaxy prepared for challenges that dwarfed anything in recorded history. We stop thinking of ourselves as the Galactic Confederation and start thinking of ourselves as a single planet in a universe full of neighbors. We need to learn everything we can from every civilization we encounter, including the refugees. And we need to develop new approaches to conflict that don't rely on superior technology or firepower. Because we won't have either advantage against intergalactic civilizations, Chancellor Vexnari concluded. Exactly. But we will have something they don't expect. Diversity of thought and adaptability. The collective has memories of thousands of civilizations, but most of them thought in similar patterns. They were destroyed because they couldn't adapt quickly enough when their fundamental assumptions were challenged. Colonel Mextar, now promoted to general and serving as the Council's military advisor, studied the strategic projections. You're proposing that our best defense is our ability to think differently from our opponents? I'm proposing that our best defense is our ability to think differently from ourselves. Every time we encounter a new civilization or face a new challenge, we need to be willing to completely re-examine our assumptions and methods, the discussion continued, for hours as the Council grappled with challenges that extended beyond military strategy into fundamental questions about the nature of consciousness, civilization, and survival. But Zara found her attention drifting to a smaller matter that exemplified the broader principles. Her old academy podmates had all graduated with honors, each having benefited from exposure to human analytical methods during their training. Grex now commanded a mixed-species tactical unit that specialized in unconventional warfare. Lycia had become a diplomatic liaison between the Confederation and the Collective. Vec was developing new mathematical models for predicting the behavior of unknown civilizations. Even Marcus had found his calling as a specialist in cross-species psychological analysis, but perhaps more importantly, the Academy itself had fundamentally changed its training methods. New cadets were now taught to question assumptions rather than simply learn procedures. Strategic thinking was emphasized over tactical superiority. Understanding opponents was given equal priority with defeating them. The Academy has requested that you return as an instructor, Admiral Corvash mentioned during a break in the proceedings. Your methods are being incorporated into the core curriculum. Sir, I'm still learning those methods myself. Every new encounter teaches us something unexpected, which is exactly why we need instructors who understand that learning never ends. As the ceremony concluded and the Council began planning for challenges that might reshape galactic civilization, Zara reflected on how much had changed since she had arrived at the Academy as a quiet human cadet labeled as non-confrontational and strategically minded. The labels had been accurate but incomplete. What the Academy's evaluation systems hadn't recognized was that humans had developed their analytical and adaptive capabilities precisely because they lacked the natural advantages that other species took for granted. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't any single ability. It was the capacity to find unconventional solutions when conventional approaches failed. And now, as the galaxy faced threats that could render all conventional approaches obsolete, that uniquely human perspective had become not just valuable, but essential for survival. The quiet human cadet who had been labeled Harmless had become the galaxy's most dangerous warrior, not because she had learned to fight, but because she had learned to think beyond the limitations of warfare itself. In a universe where strength and technology were no longer sufficient guarantees of survival, the ability to understand, adapt, and innovate had become the ultimate weapon. As Zara left the Council chambers to begin preparations for humanity's next role in galactic history, she carried with her the knowledge that sometimes the greatest victories were achieved not by being stronger than your enemies, but by being different enough from them that their advantages became irrelevant. The galaxy was about to discover that humans had been preparing for intergalactic warfare for their entire evolutionary history, not by developing superior weapons, but by developing superior ways of thinking about problems that had no obvious solutions. In the vast cosmos where civilizations rose and fell based on their ability to adapt to the unthinkable, humanity's greatest contribution would not be their technology or their courage, but their stubborn refusal to accept that any problem was truly unsolvable.